Well, thank you, Simon, for your kind introduction, and to the Global Ethical Finance Initiative team for the opportunity to speak today. It's encouraging to see such a wide representation of the financial sector in developed and developing countries coming together at the Ethical Finance 2021. The COVID pandemic has exposed many of the risks to our societies and to economies, and what we're seeing unfold in devastating waves is heartbreaking. But let's be blunt, COVID-19 is but an overture of what is to come if we don't manage better our relationship with nature and with the wider sustainability challenges. The finance and the business community knows this. For the second year running, the World Economic Forum placed environmental issues high on its annual global risk report, both in terms of the likelihood as well as impact. And they were right to do so. Climate change, biodiversity, and nature loss, pollution, and waste are undermining the natural systems that we need to bring health, prosperity, and peace to every person on this planet. And even with this knowledge, we are in this very precarious moment. The big developed economies that are most responsible for the three planetary crises, the crisis of climate, the crisis of biodiversity, and the crisis of pollution and waste, those economies are now edging closer to exiting the pandemic. They are, unfortunately, edging closer to a return to the old polluting ways. Instead, we need to take real and meaningful action to stabilize the climate, to protect biodiversity and nature and our natural world, and to stem pollution and waste. And that means moving investment flows away from unsustainable consumption and production and towards more sustainable patterns. And that means no more financing of coal, deforestation-free food and feed and fiber, a regulatory framework that limits pollution and protects climate and nature, stimulus funds investing in zero carbon, nature positive, and pollution free economies, public and private finance that fuel the energy transition to a healthy planet, to green jobs, and to prosperity. We need banks and insurers and investors to drive this change through a more ethical, purpose driven approach to finance mobilization. Yes, governments should set the guardrails for sustainability through central banks and capital market regulators, but financiers should not wait to be forced to do the right thing. Financiers need to lean in and lead for the sake of their own long term profitability as much as for the sake of the planet. So, dear friends, there is a growing momentum to realign that capital. In UNEP, our financial inquiry over several years examined the systems shifts needed across the financial sector. Our finance initiative, UNEP, has been working for many years as a UN finance sector partnership, now involving more than 400 banks and insurers around the world. UNEP-FI has established powerful frameworks for responsible conduct, including the principles for responsible investment, the principles for responsible insurance, and most recently, the principles for responsible banking. UNEP-FI has also established alliances of leaders, including 36 investors in the Net Zero Asset Owners Alliance, who are issuing credible, ambitious emission reduction targets for 2025. For instance, having Allianz Group, one of the world's largest investors, targeting a 25% reduction in their carbon footprint within 4 years is significant. Meanwhile, in stimulus packages, the EU, China, and now the US have dedicated hundreds of billions of dollars to green initiatives such as renewable energy and restoration of ecosystems. It is not enough, and too much money has gone into the old and gray and polluting, but we're seeing a beginning. UNEP is also pleased to be one of the organizations supporting preparations of the proposed Task Force for Nature-Related Finance Disclosures, or TNFD, which builds on the important momentum and lessons learned from the climate risk disclosure that the TCFD helped drive. But despite this progress, we've not dedicated enough finance to nature. The State of Finance for Nature report released by UNEP in collaboration with the WEF and the Economics of Land Degradation Initiative found that 133 billion US dollars per year is flowing to nature-based solutions, and that's fine and good. However, to get on top of the three planetary crises: the crisis of climate, the crisis of nature and biodiversity, and the crisis of pollution and waste. These flows will need to triple by 2030 and increase 4 times by 2050. One important and immediate priority is to get investments flowing towards land restoration as part of the UN Decade for Ecosystem Restoration, which officially began on June 5th, the World Environment Day. Restoring just 350 million hectares by 2030 could generate $9 trillion in ecosystem services, mitigate climate change, and increase food security. Globally, there are 2 billion hectares of degraded land, so there's a far greater potential for investment. There are many such opportunities. Rather than list them all, I'd like to offer up 4 approaches for financiers to adopt, whether voluntary or through government arm twisting, or both, to create better conditions for ethical finance. First, financial institutions need to start measuring and accounting for their impact and the impacts of their financing. The finance sector needs to do better at measuring and communicating measures of impact, both positive outcomes of financing, like emissions reductions, and the negatives, like biodiversity loss or human rights violations. The TNFD could help and should help with this challenge when it comes to managing the impact on nature. Second, financiers need to set real and comprehensive sustainability targets. Investors need to treat sustainability as a key indicator of portfolio performance, not as a corporate social responsibility effort. Entire portfolios and organizations need to be consistent with the SDGs, the Paris Agreement, and other international agreements such as the Biodiversity Convention. The Principles for Responsible Banking is a target setting framework that's already helping the banking community establish guidance for target setting on gender equality, biodiversity conservation, resource efficiency, financial inclusion, and the race to net zero carbon emissions. And third, financial institutions must follow the science. The Net Zero Asset Owners Alliance, for example, relies heavily on science to set a timetable for net zero emissions. They have clear intermediate targets and have already established an advisory board of eminent scientists to help ensure their way to integrity. We must see more of such science-led action that converts targets into credible sectoral pathways across the entire financial industry. And my fourth point, transparency and accountability are essential to avoid greenwashing. We need financial powerhouses to open their books to scrutiny to ensure that they make good on their commitments and promises. The Principles for Responsible Banking requires third-party review on the signatories' annual reporting, and the signatories have also established a civil society advisory body, which allows important inputs from a stakeholder that views and holds them to account. That's the kind of transparency that creates credibility. So these are the 4 to-do items that we encourage the financial sector to follow for ethical finance. Now, we need everyone to follow that green rule book, and that's not just because the Earth's beleaguered natural systems need the finance industry. The green transition is a significant commercial opportunity that can drive job creation and deliver sustainable growth and profits. Ethical finance is in everybody's best interest. It is the best way to ensure and secure a future of peace, prosperity, and of course, profits. Thank you.